Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Storwick. I'm the Vice President and Director of Communications for the Royal Alberta United Services Institute. I'd like to welcome everybody to our series of presentations on national security strategies. And for those of you who are not familiar with RAUSI, it was founded in 1920 as a think tank at the end of the First World War. Over the decades, it has evolved into a veteran service organization, but we've returned to our roots and have evolved back into a think tank. And tonight we are honored to have Brigadier General retired Todd Strickland and Vincent Rigby to present their views on Canada's national security policy. Quentin Innes will be introducing Todd and Vincent, who will each introduce their points, and questions will be taken throughout the presentation.
Thanks very much, Karen. Thanks for that introduction. As advertised, I'm Quentin Innes. I'll be your host and moderator tonight. First order of business, I see, Jim, you beat me to it, but first order of business is go Jays. All right, tonight I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Brigadier General Todd Strickland, MSM-CD. Todd is a former commandant of the Canadian Forces College and is now a PhD candidate at Queen's University. Vincent, we're very lucky to have Vincent. He's the former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, now Professor of Practice at McGill and a Senior Fellow at CSIS. So both seasoned practitioners, and they'll be speaking from their experience, giving you their thoughts and analysis based on their years of experience working in government and in the military at the highest levels. So with that said, I will turn the floor over to Todd, and we'll go from there.
Hey, folks. Good evening. I'm assuming you can hear me okay. It's always interesting to see who the participants are and see who's watching. So special shout out to Chris Choden, Dave Byer, Paul Burry, among others. It's good to be amongst old friends. I'm going to start by saying that my background has heavily influenced what I'm going to be talking to tonight, so it's worth just touching on that. I've been influenced by my time on the SJS in Ottawa, tours in Afghanistan, my professional education in the States, as well as my time in Korea. Additionally, my time as commandant at both the Canadian Army Command and Staff College and the Canadian Forces College gave me exposure to international perspectives on strategy. So that's feeding into all of this. So I've got about 8 points that I'll throw on the table, and then hopefully that will feed some questions. And the first of them is that our strategic culture in Canada is underdeveloped. We actually lack a common understanding of what a strategy is, where it fits with regard to policy, and even the difference between a strategy, a policy, and a plan. And we frequently use those terms to mean the same thing. I believe the simplest formulation of a strategy is that it details the ends, ways, and means. That is to say, our goals and how we are going to achieve them. It's also worthwhile to throw risk in there, the risks we're willing to accept in the attainment of the goals that we seek to achieve. When I think of strategy, I rely on the definition provided by Colin Gray, who thought of it as a bridge between policy and the operationalization of it. So if policy gives the end states to be achieved, then a strategy would flush it out with the ways and means and risks that we expect our troops in whatever fashion to get after. Moving on, how we conceive and create our strategies is driven by our worldview. It's going to be by necessity influenced by our national interests and values, or at least what the holders of the pen, that is the authors of a strategy, think they are. I would suggest that a discussion on interests and values needs to be happening as well. And at the very least, I think the national interests that a strategy is intended to support need to be articulated in the policies that emanate from government. Now, looking at Canadian strategy, we actually haven't published what I would term to be a strategy in quite some time. We don't have a good track record with regard to publishing national policies, whether it be a national security policy, a foreign policy, an industrial policy, a domestic policy, that can then be turned over into strategies. That, in spite of that, within the Department of National Defense, we've actually been fairly consistent in the strategic aims that we have sought to achieve. whether it be protection of sovereignty, support to our international alliances, activities in the Arctic, and that falls under sovereignty to a certain degree, peacekeeping, and the protection of Canadians. And the actual order of those goals has varied over time depending on the government and depending on the context. But those 5 points routinely pop up in whatever policy or strategy we articulate. My next point is, why have a strategy and a policy? Well, I'll suggest that having a national policy with subordinate strategies acts as a unifying agent, which can get different agencies pulling in the same direction. It allows for the prioritization of different initiatives. It also allows for accountability between government and their subordinate departments. Something that we have stumbled with, it would create transparency so that the wider population can both be invested in the undertaking or register its opposition to it. And as an example, I'd throw out, I believe it's the 1984 Defense White Paper authored by Perrin Beatty when he was minister, which announced the creation of a nuclear submarine fleet. It also allows for the establishment of common ground with partners and allies, and an understanding of where we are pursuing common goals and where we are not going to be engaging. Lastly, it allows for a degree of predictability in any given situation, and this is particularly relevant to our interactions with industry. Common complaint is that industry doesn't know the direction we're headed necessarily. A strategy would help that. So almost done. The challenges for the future. Right now, we have modernization efforts going on in the Air Force and the Army, as well as the Navy contemplating the purchase of submarines. We need to be able to justify departmental needs, particularly as we see all three of the environments really modernizing. Creating a strategy nested within an overarching policy helps simplify the process of explaining to everyone what we are doing. My second point is we need to open the tent and have broader participation. Our conceptions of security are changing, and a national security strategy really has to rest on more than just the Department of National Defense. Health, industry, the RCMP, intelligence agencies, they all have a role to play, and I'm probably leaving out some others as well. And unless we have a national level policy, then our ability to integrate others rests on shaky ground. So it can't be just a departmental initiative. And lastly, we need to acknowledge that in an environment that has no articulated common national perspective on issues, strategy making becomes extremely challenging. And as an old friend said, it becomes extremely messy. So the world is more complex than it was at the end of the Cold War. We are now seeing a more multipolar international environment with a resurgent Russia, an ascendant China, and a reluctant America. Further, we have multiple significant ongoing conflicts, all happening at the same time, as the value in the formulation of the rules-based international order is being weakened by multiple actors. And in the absence of a playbook that can serve as a start point for orchestrating what we are doing, every incident becomes a crisis and consumes both time and energy that could be better spent in actually getting things done as opposed to deciding what to do. And I would close by saying we cannot afford to keep doing things the same way we have in the past. And with that cue, I'll return it to you, and then we'll see where we go from here.
All right, Todd, that's excellent. I'm seeing questions starting to pop up in the chat already, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, politics or policy, sorry, is not just about D&D. We have to have a broad tent. We have to bring in other agencies and other parts of society, parts of government. So with that, I will hand it over to Vincent. And Vincent, can you bring in your introduction and enlighten us?
I'll do my very best. Thanks very much, Quentin. And thank you, Todd. Those were great opening remarks. I'll try not to be too repetitive and go over the same material, but I'll probably hit upon some of the same threads and try and pull out some similar themes. Just in terms of my background, so you understand where I'm coming from, as Quentin mentioned, I was the National Security Intelligence Advisor, sorry, for the last couple of years of my career. But I actually spent my entire career, about 30 years, in the security realm. So half of my career was actually in the Department of National Defense on the policy side. And I was actually the lead pen at the Director General level of the Defense Policy Statement in 2005. I was also a contributor to the National Security Policy in 2004. I helped write the international chapter. You'll recall, some of you, that there were about 6 or 7 chapters in that national security policy, and one dealt with contributing to international peace and security. So as a Director General at D&D, I helped shape that chapter and provided comments on the rest of the document. And after I left D&D, I've been at the Privy Council office. I ran the International Assessment Secretariat. I was at CETA and did development policy, brought over to CETA to try and actually add a bit of a security dimension to international development before CETA was amalgamated with the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade to create Global Affairs Canada. I'd been at Global Affairs Canada. I was the ADM Strategic Policy there. I was at Public Safety as the Associate Deputy Minister and then the Associate Deputy Minister at Global Affairs. So I say all this not to trumpet my horn, far from it, but just to give you a sense of my experience and my take on some of this, the lens that I look at all of this through. I mean, honestly, I think what we have to start off with is Todd's already mentioned it in passing, is that we've not had a national security policy in 20 years. We've only ever had one in our entire history, and that was in 2004, as I just mentioned. And I think Todd is 100% right. We do not have a strong national security culture in this country. We do not have a strong defense culture in this country for many, many, many decades. I think that we have believed that we live in a fireproof house, that we are far from the madding crowd, to quote Thomas Hardy, that all the bad things in this world happen somewhere else. And if bad things do come close to our shores, the United States is going to take care of us. Geography is no longer going to protect us. The United States is no longer a reliable ally. And I have to say that the international security environment, the domestic security environment, has been turned on its head since 2004. And we are living in a world right now, which I've argued again and again, is more dangerous, more unpredictable, more tumultuous than at any time since the end of the Second World War. I lived through a big chunk of the Cold War, and there was always this sense of impending doom to a certain extent, but there was also this sense that at the end of the day, there was strategic stability, there was mutual assured destruction. I remember in my teens and 20s and 30s thinking, I think we're going to be okay. There was never this sense, even though I was born just before the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was never this sense that the world was going to go to hell in a handcart completely. I'm not sure I feel that way anymore. I think there's more unpredictability, and the world is just so much more unsettled than at any time I remember during the Cold War. It's a world that, as Todd mentioned, has seen a resurgence of geostrategic rivalry, of global extremism at home and internationally, of rapidly emerging technology, not always used for the best purposes, but often for nefarious purposes. We've seen transnational threats such as pandemics and climate change. We still have terrorism as a potential scourge, including at home, organized crime. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This is a crazy, crazy world that we live in right now. And as Todd said, it's a threat environment that is unbelievably complicated and has really come to redefine national security. I like to say that this is not the national security of our grandparents. It's a much, much broader definition. I think in the good old days of the Cold War, national security was seen very much as a state-to-state phenomenon. Now national security is directly affecting individuals. It's affecting so many different layers of society. Cyber threats of terrorism that affect individuals like never before. And honestly, what we need, I think, in this world is a national security strategy that brings in all the tools at a nation state's that a nation state can bring to bear to respond to this incredibly complex security environment. So as Todd said, I think that this is a strategy that needs to be, in effect, whole of Canada. It's no longer just about the federal government. It's about bringing in the provinces. It's about bringing in the territories. It's about bringing in municipal, private sector, non-governmental organizations, universities, research institutions. It has to be whole of Canada because the threat operates on so many different levels. And we are missing that. We do not have that. As Todd said, we've had defense policies. We've had a couple of defense reviews over the last 7 or 8 years. Strong, secure, engaged in 2017. Our North, strong and free a couple of years ago. Last year, 2024. But beyond that, not only have we not had a national security policy in over 20 years, we've not had a foreign policy in over 20 years. So we need an integrated strategy that brings together all these tools. It's a strategy that would include not just defense. Defense is a core component, but would also include diplomacy. It would include development because there's a security dimension to development. It would include intelligence. It would include cyber strategy, critical infrastructure protection, protection of our economic resources right across the board. This is what we need. And this is what a national security strategy should do. It should draw all these components together in an integrated way. And the best national security strategies in other countries, and I'm sure we'll get into what some other countries are doing, that's what they do. They bring in all these diverse resources at the end of the day. And we need a strategy in this world because, as Todd said, it is an unpredictable world. There was an interesting article that appeared in the Canadian press by Jim Bronskill not too long ago, and I was actually quoted in it. And Jim had put out an ATI to government about the national security policy, which is supposedly being drafted. And what he got was a briefing note that had gone up to the Prime Minister from officials saying that we need to put the national security policy on hold right now because the world is just too unpredictable and there's too much. It's too much in a frenzy and impossible to figure out where we can go. And I would argue that it's just the opposite. At a time like this is when you actually need a strategy to navigate a world that is so unsettled and that is so unpredictable. And I think that, I use the analogy of when you get in a car, you want to know where to go. You want to know which roads to take. You want to make sure that your car actually works. You look under the hood, the engine's working. And that's what a national security strategy is all about. It's a direction to yourself. You as the driver, the government of Canada needs to know where it wants to go in this kind of world. It's direction to the public service. Public service that provides advice to government, but also implements policy. And again, in particular, it's about integrating all those assets and tools across government and outside of the federal government, integrating them so that they can provide provide bang for the buck in terms of securing our national security. It's about informing Canadians where we want to go. And one of the reasons why we have a weak national security culture in this country is that we don't have these conversations with Canadians enough. And I believe that if we're going to have a new national security policy, we should consult Canadians. We shouldn't spend years doing it, but we should be going out there and talking about the threats that are out there and how we're going to manage them. So a national security policy or a strategy serves a really important purpose in informing Canadians and letting them know where we need to go, because you can't get the support and the trust of Canadians if you do not talk about these issues at the end of the day. It's also about informing our allies that we are serious about defense and security. Here is our strategy. This is what we're going to do. These are the resources that we're going to allocate to support this strategy, including financially. It's also about informing our enemies, our competitors, those out there who want to hurt us. This is what we're going to do to take care of ourselves. This is how we're going to work with our allies in protecting Western interests and values. So there are multiple audiences that a national security strategy speaks to, and they're all, I think, important. And I think above all, though, that Canadian audience is absolutely critical. Really talking to Canadians directly and trying to improve that culture at the end of the day. Quentin, I'll stop there. I guess my last point would just be, I got a little bit nervous when I heard recently, saw the Bronskill article and saw some other signals that perhaps we're not going to see a national security policy as soon as we thought we would. This is being talked about now for a while. It was first announced in Our North, Strong and Free in, I think, the spring of 2024, that there would be a national security policy and a defense review every 4 years, and the national security policy was going to be the first priority and get it out the door as quickly as possible. It was my understanding that the current government under Carney would do the same. I'm a little bit scared now that this is going to be put on the back burner again. And I think it's going to be a horrible, horrible mistake if it is put on the back burner and we don't move ahead soon. And not just because of the threats that are out there, but even with respect to some of our closest allies, including the United States, who we're not sure where they stand right now. And ironically enough, they're putting together their national security strategy. It's supposed to be out quite soon. We need to know how we're going to engage with our competitors and our enemies, but also how we're going to engage with our allies as we move forward. So I hope that wasn't too incoherent and rambling, Quentin, but there's some ideas to throw out there, and I look forward to the discussion.
No, that's excellent. What I get out of that is the idea that we need to have a roadmap. That roadmap needs to be built with the input from Canadians, with the input from all government departments, not just defense, not just global affairs. And the product of that roadmap really is societal trust and cohesion. It is one of the ways that we navigate an increasingly unstable world. And it looks to me like PMO, based on what you said about PMO saying it's too volatile out there to produce a strategy right now. Looks to me like they've stumbled across the concept of VUCA and tripped over it. So if they think the world is complex now, give it 10 minutes. Todd, anything to add to that?
Not really, aside from some of us have dropped in the British and the Australian national security strategies into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Having a strategy really is important in an era where strategic choices are being articulated on social media. And we haven't gotten to that point yet in Canada, but some of our allies are doing that. And that makes it all the harder for a government or for the Department of National Defense to respond in an appropriate manner, because they spend all their time spinning wheels and reacting to what's hit the Twitter sphere, to use an old term. So I'm a firm believer in having both the policy framework and then the nested subordinate strategies that support that policy framework. It enables action.
Awesome. Okay, so there's some good comments in the chat already. The discussion is building. So the first person I'd like to turn it over to is Jim Cox. You got out the gate there first, Jim, with your Go Jays support. So I will reward you for that by giving you the first crack at Vincent and Todd.
Well, thank you. And gentlemen, thank you. It's very interesting, everything that you have said. And you've hit on many of the points that I had wanted to ask about. But I suppose the one at the top of the list, and Vincent, I think probably is the best able to answer this or provide a perspective. I'm still interested in whether we can ever hope that our government and the leaders who are the ones who are responsible for the protection and defense of the country at large, if they have the intellectual power or the horsepower to actually produce an omnibus security policy that engages all of the government and the people. And in support of that, and it isn't in the conversation as yet, to promulgate a grand strategy that is capturing and mobilizing and engaging all of the elements of national power across our society. I suppose the question in the middle of all of that is, can we ever hope to have a clear and structured policy, a security policy at the top, and a grand strategy in support of it?
Well, I could take a first crack at it. I'm sure Todd's got views again. I don't get too worked up about the nomenclature, Jim, and it's great to see you by the way. I think you were the one who actually got me on the show. So great to talk to you again. I don't get too hung up on the nomenclature, and Todd may challenge me here, but I find that's quite inside baseball, a strategy versus a policy versus a strategy. I think for the average Canadian, a strategy is a strategy is a strategy. The nomenclature in 2004 was actually a national security policy. That's what it was called, the NSP. It wasn't even called a strategy. But if you want to call it a strategy, ways and means, Todd said, then get down into policy and so on and so forth, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I see one of the comments in the chat here is this is about political will. This is about the federal government deciding this is what they have to do. I've told this story many times, so it's probably becoming a little bit tired and hackneyed, but I cannot count how many times I spoke to politicians throughout my career and said, listen, defense is really, really important. National security is important. We should be doing X, Y, and Z, constructing strategies, implementing strategies, et cetera, et cetera. And what I heard again and again and again, my constituents are not raising this issue with me. And so if Canadians don't care about it, why should I care about it? At the end of the day, this is political, and I need to get my seat in the House of Commons again. Government has to deal with the issues that our constituents are raising. And my standard comment back was, listen, leadership means you actually lead. It means you actually shape public opinion. It means you actually get out there, talk about the threats, and talk about what you need to do to respond to the threats. And the fact that Canadians aren't raising it means that, well, maybe they need to be educated. Maybe they need to be informed. So to answer your question, Jim, I mean, can governments do this? Can they pull it together? Well, it does have to start with the federal government. They certainly have the tools. They have a extremely able federal public service, an extremely able military providing great advice, increasing number of tools mechanisms to deal with the provinces and territories and other players across the country. But at the end of the day, they've got to have the political will to say, we're going to do this. We are going to do it. And I have been quite impressed by the fact that one of the first major speeches that Prime Minister Carney made when he came into power was to go before the Mug School and give a major speech on defense and security. And what did he talk about for the first 10 minutes? He talked about the threat environment and how dangerous and unpredictable and awful the world is at the moment, and that we need to do things. Now, that speech was focused on spending 5% of our GDP on defense and was focused on defense capabilities, but he touched on national security more broadly. And I see defense as a component of national security. So governments have to lead. I think that Prime Minister Carney, up to this point, is saying all the right things. Has said that there will be a national security policy. It'll come out when it comes out. He's not going to give us timing. Notwithstanding the article that I mentioned earlier, the Canadian Press article, we'll see. But yes, everything's there to do this. My understanding is that there's a draft probably sitting in the Privy Council office right now. It's being drafted out of the center, I believe, and that's where it should be drafted. And that all of those elements are coming together. So can it be done? Absolutely, it can be done. And not only can it be done, it should be done. Other countries are doing it. The United States does it. The UK just came out with one. Germany came out with their first ever national security strategy a couple of years ago. Japan's doing one. So why are we doing one? 20 years, when you think about it, 21 years since we've had one of these, and look at the state of the world. Look where it's gone in 21 years. It's mind-boggling that we don't have one. And I know that on one level, for a lot of bureaucrats, they've been reluctant, I think, to recommend that we do these big strategies because they're hard to do. Mm-hmm. That's part of my answer to your question as well. Can they be done? Yes, but they're not easy to do, especially if they're integrated and they're comprehensive, like some of the BIT reviews of the last couple of years, where you do bring all those instruments of power, as you said, and it's not just defense and foreign policy and diplomacy, but all these other departments, basically right across government. They're really hard to do. The last time we tried to do anything remotely similar to this was in 2004, 2005, when we had the international policy statement and we had trade, development, defense, and foreign policy all rolled up into one. And it was really tough. And I think a lot of bureaucrats came out of that saying, never again, we're never going to do that. It was too much trouble. And I have the scars to show from it because I said I had the pen on the defense policy statement. But that's why we're paid the big bucks to go out and do that stuff. And 20 years later, we need to do something even beyond that and a broader national security strategy. So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but a resounding yes, we can do it and we should do it.
Thank you.
Jim, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you
Great.
very
Todd, do you want to add anything to that?
Just very quickly, I don't think we need to get wrapped around about the axle about terminology either. I don't care whether you call it a white paper and then a red book at the national level that integrates everyone, and then every department has a green book. But it's up to government to establish the ends that we are to achieve. It's up to each of the departments to determine where they fit in achieving that end, and that all has to be articulated. The other challenge, aside from lack of will to do it, is that it does put a bit of a risk exposure on the government when they publish a strategy like this, because clearly opposition can make hay out of the fact that we aren't meeting the strategy or we're not achieving it. Some will say that's a bad thing. I actually think it's a good thing, because one, it means democracy is working, but two, it also gets everyone invested in the strategy. And Perrin Beatty's white paper is a good example. You know, Canadians came out and said, no, we don't want nuclear subs, you know, and harnessed all the mechanisms to inform government of that, and that disappeared. It's not a bad thing when the system works. I'll leave it there.
No, and if I can jump in, that's a really important point, because a lot of countries, including in Canada, over the years, over the decades, have put out strategies that are not worth the paper they're written on because they're not implementable. So if it's not implementable, if you don't allocate the resources, if you don't put in place the mechanisms, the governments to make this stuff work, then Todd is 100% right. It will have a shelf life of about 6 months, and it will just be cannon fodder for the opposition party. So it has to be bold, it has to be innovative, it has to have a vision, but at the end of the day, if you can't implement it, it is useless. And that's another criticism you often get of these strategies, including from bureaucrats. I had a very senior bureaucrat after I left, when I started pushing very hard for it publicly, saying, oh, these things only last 6 months. A good strategy, if it's implementable, can last a long, long time if there's an inherent flexibility built into it as well. You have very, very clear goals and objectives, but you also have flexible means to achieve those objectives at the end of the day. So they're not easy to craft. It's a very delicate balancing act to do these things. But again, they can be done. I think we've seen that in other countries. And if it turns out that after a year or two that's not quite what you want, then you revise it. The Brits did an integrated comprehensive review in 2022, I think it was, and they revised it 18 months later. They updated it after Russia invaded Ukraine. So you can do that too. It's okay to roll your sleeves up and go, you know what? We need to tweak this.
So bottom line is we can't be afraid of doing the hard work.
Yep.
So in our last RAUSI session, we talked to Americans about how the U.S. policy, how the U.S. process works. And we've touched on the process a little bit here. I don't want to go too deeply into the rabbit hole, but there is a question from Gary Madigan about whether a white paper would be useful or not. And in a minute, I'm going to, Jerry, I will call on you to ask that question. There's another question from Crystal Lynn Dawn about politics, why it's important. And I think we've covered that. So with that said, I think I'm going to go to Jerry and then to Chris Chowden, who's got his hand up. So Jerry?
Hi, good evening. I'm Jerry Maddock. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good enough. I'm Jerry Maddock, and I'm an ex-logistician, major finance officer with 28 years worth of service. I have the question is, on the white paper itself, don't you think we should have a strong white paper that actually draws a line in the sand and makes the government accountable? And if you don't have a strong white paper that makes it accountable, you can no longer have someone looking at the results to say that we got things achieved. That's where I think the strength of a white paper lies. Also, on the other side of the coin, what drives a white paper, and when you brought this up, was foreign policy. We got to go back to the Bearsonian ways of having a bloody good, strong foreign policy paper that drives the white paper. That's what's lacking in Canada today. And so I'm interested in your comments.
Sure. Todd, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So I'll start off. What I would say is, in an ideal world, we would have that foreign policy articulated. But I would argue with the way that the Canadian Armed Forces have been employed, with Op Lentus as a case in point, ever growing in numbers, we also need a domestic policy. So having both a foreign and a domestic policy that work in hand with one another, you could then create a defense white paper that would work to achieve the goals. So I got no heartache with that. But I think what we're actually missing is, in addition to that foreign and domestic policy statements, there needs to be an integrating agent at the governmental level that integrates the efforts of all the departments. And some will say, well, that's PCO, they'll get on with it. But I think it's actually more than that. And we need to actually have that missing playbook that we don't have right now that integrates the departments around national security. So a national security policy that everyone can see themselves in, I think is worthwhile. But I don't disagree with you. White papers and accountability are fundamental. I would also, excuse me, I would also argue, though, that if we're going to get real success and if we're going to aim big, going for a nonpartisan approach more similar to what we're seeing coming out of Australia would actually help us tackle the problems of human security and national security in a far more coherent fashion.
I think you're quite right. And I think we got to get the issues straight for Canadians. What has to happen is they got to redefine security. It's not just defense itself. It's also about energy security, food security, you name it. Right now, everything's discombobulated and no one understands that we are at threat at the moment. We can't defend ourselves.
Maybe I can throw in a few thoughts here and agree with you completely. I think both Todd and I made that point in our introductory comments that national security is it's much, much broader now, and it encompasses all elements of a nation state in terms of social cohesion, economic prosperity, the security and safety of people and territory. I mean, it's so broad. Public safety issues, pandemics, etc., and that's the way it should be, as far as I'm concerned. It is by definition a much, much broader concept now. To your specific points, I mean, again, we're kind of in a nomenclature, right? All these documents used to be called a white paper. So the last true white paper in terms of terminology, I think, was in 1994. Defense white paper, and there's a foreign policy white paper. Then we did a policy statement in 2004, and it was called the defense policy statement. But that's effectively a white paper. What a white paper is, it's a statement of government intent, right? It's a written document that lays out a strategy or a policy, whatever terminology you want to use. So whether it was the defense policy statement or strong, secure, engaged in 2017 was effectively a white paper, even though it was called the defense statement. And the same with the update. So putting that aside, yes, we need white papers. And again, a national security strategy would effectively be a white paper as well. And so we've already explained why we need them. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. A big part of it is accountability. Government says it's going to do this and puts it in writing. and then it is held to account. And then opposition parties, Canadian citizenry, people like us can take shots at the government if they don't fulfill the principles, the objectives, et cetera, in that white paper. So that's one of the reasons you do put them out, as opposed to what happened under the Trudeau government, which was you never really knew, outside of defense policy and a little bit on the development side as well. I helped craft that when I was at Global Affairs. But on the national security side, you never really knew how to hold the government to account because you weren't sure what their goals and objectives were. So there's a direct correlation with that.
I think I'm going to split a few hairs here. With a white paper, there was a certain consistency over time. Doesn't matter what government was in power, whether it was conservative, liberal, or whatnot. The white paper defined what the key elements were going to be. Now, you went to the defense strategy element. That became the defense strategy of that particular government, which had no consensus. It was all political. It was all based on party politics. So I think we have to go back to the center and try to bring people onto what do we really want to do with Canada? What are our objectives and goals? And firmly decided both parties could agree to, which will drive the strategy and the direction.
But it's extremely, extremely important to realize that all of these documents are political by definition, political in the sense
Oh, true.
it's the government of the day. The government is the decision maker. The government is the policy maker. They're the ones who set policy. It's not the bureaucrats. It's not the military. It's the civilian government. And those policies are only in place as long as the government is there. So if a perfect example is the defense policy statement that I helped craft in 2005, a conservative government came in 2006, and that policy was effectively dead. They kept some elements of it, but that basically was ancient history. And so I agree that governments need to set these policies, but they only last for as long as the term of the government. And then the next government, it's up to them. They can adopt it if they want. They can say, we love that previous government's policy, but it's not guaranteed. I couldn't agree with you more in terms of foreign policy. I could not define Canada's foreign policy under the previous government if you paid me all the money in the world. And I just don't know what the goals were, what the objectives were. It was very transactional. It was very ad hoc. It was very responsive. And national security is a two-sided coin. It has a domestic element and it has an international element. A lot of the threats that we face start internationally. So what we do in terms of contributing to international peace and security also has an impact on how we protect ourselves at home. If we don't have a coherent foreign policy, we are in trouble. And so that's why I made the point that when we do a national security strategy, there has to be a diplomatic element in there. We have to know what we want to do in the world. So I couldn't agree with you more. And the integrating element, I think Todd is 100% right. We need to be able to pull all of this together. So the strategy is helpful, but how does the strategy get carried out? Well, individual departments, individual ministers, and then others across the country. But what I think was a really great achievement under the last government was the creation of a National Security Council. And that's something that I had talked about a little bit, not a lot, because I served as NSIA during the pandemic. So we were kind of bothered by other stuff, but I had started to talk a little bit about the need for a National Security Council. I was so glad to see the government put it in place at the tail end of 2023. The National Security Council, chaired by the Prime Minister, that should be where the national security strategy is signed off, and that's where it's monitored. That's where you should be having the Prime Minister sitting down with his key ministers on a regular basis and going, how are we doing in terms of implementing the strategy? Are all the pieces coming together? Is everything integrated? My understanding, and I've heard this said a couple of times publicly recently, is that the Prime Minister is very much that way. He's about new ideas. He's about, let's talk about new policy initiatives, but he's also very, very keen on implementation and doesn't want to get too far ahead with new stuff if we're not implementing the stuff that we said we were going to do. And this is one of the common criticisms of the previous government, to use a military term. It was very fire and forget. It was all about the announceable, and then nothing happened after that. I get the sense with the new government that this is also about implementation and making sure that we do the stuff we say we're going to do.
Well, I won't take up any more of your time. You guys covered a lot of the points that I've been working on, and I appreciate what you said. And thank you very much for letting me speak my word. Thank you.
Thank you.
Todd, anything to add into that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we can kind of sum that up with Jim Cox's comment that national security policy has to cover domestic, peripheral, and abroad. And it also, in an ever-changing world, it's got to cover things like immigration. It needs to cover energy policy. So I think as mostly an audience of military, former military, we tend to kind of default to national defense. But I think we can elevate the discussion by talking about national security and then broaden that discussion and broaden the tent. With that, I'm seeing nods. With that, I'm going to pass the torch over to Chris Chowden for his question. And then I'd like to call on Cassandra McDonald after that.
Thanks very much, Quinn. And I don't know if I should say Todd or General Strickland, but interested in furthering your comments and Mr. Rigby's view on this too. Of what are the odds of us managing to do what the Australians did and of having all the major political parties sit down and agree on general defense principles so that you don't have U-turns like helicopter contracts being canceled during an election campaign and then brought back later at great expense because the old ones aren't airworthy. So.
Chris, that's a great question, and I'm afraid I have a waffly answer. If you'd asked Australians 30 years ago if they'd ever achieve a cross-party defense policy, I think they would have asked you what you were smoking. But they were able to achieve it to a greater or lesser degree, and we can't be naive and think it'll solve all the problems. I mean, when you look at the rigmarole surrounding the F-35 that we have gone through in this country, would that go away with a system where both parties or all three parties or all five parties agreed that here's the way we're going to go? I don't know. But if we don't try, we will never get there. So as a first step, developing a national security strategy that's based on a national security policy that you can then leverage to get politicians on side, I think that would be a good thing. But it's going to call for a heavy degree of engagement. And that's where organizations like this become frightfully important. If we're not satisfied, and actually, I should clarify, I'm Todd, right? So I'm not general anymore, but that's where organizations like this come in. We can register our dissatisfaction with the fact that our policies have generally been partisan since Sir John A. We don't like it. We can change it. We get to vote.
I think, again,
Vincent?
the point that I made earlier, it's quite phenomenal in any country these days where you can get political consensus across the board. As I said, governments by definition are political, right? They come in with their own set of priorities. They're across the political spectrum in terms of left, right, center. So it's difficult to achieve consensus on anything. And the opposition is there to basically hold the government to account. So they're going to be critical and they're going to raise questions and they're going to say, why are you not doing more of this or less of that? So that's always going to be there. But I would agree that if there's one area, especially in this world right now, in the state of the threat environment, if there's one area where you'd like to think that we could achieve some consensus, it would be defense and security. It would be national security writ large. And again, if we're going to get that, to answer your question, will we ever see that? Well, I think it starts with having a conversation with Canadians. It starts with a government being very transparent. It's about a government that is willing to have the tough conversations with Canadians. If you want to go to 5% of defense spending, it's okay to say we're going to go to 5% or 3.5, it's 2%. And everybody is going to say, if they're polled, yeah, given the state of the world right now, we want to do that. But when they start feeling it in their pocketbooks and they realize that to get to 5%, they're not going to have more money in their pocket for groceries, for housing, buy cars, those sorts of things, that's when it gets difficult. So the conversation has to continue. It has to continue. So I think it's going to be really important for government to get out there and continue to talk, without fear mongering, without putting the the fear of God into Canadians on a perpetual basis so that everybody's down in their basement waiting for the big one. You don't want to go there, but I think you do have to say the world's a dangerous place and this is what we're going to have to do. So we're going to have to tighten up our bootstraps and do this the right way. So I think that we're going to need to have that conversation. And I believe the government is starting to do that in a lot of ways, but it's got to start that way because we've not had these kinds of conversations in the past. It's interesting. I always say this because I think all of you will know our military history and our defense history. We're always there when the chips are down. We're there for look at the major conflicts of the 20th century, all the way back to the Boer War, First World War, Second World War, Korean War, the Cold War, Afghanistan, all the troubles of the 1990s. The Canadian military was there. But whenever we had to go into battle or we went to the cupboard to see what we had, the cupboard was bare because we didn't have these conversations with Canadians because they weren't particularly interested until the what hit the fan. So we got to have those conversations and make sure that that the cupboard's full, so when we open it, we can actually take stuff out and do what we have to do, not to push that metaphor too far. So that's where I think it's got to start. It's got to be a transparency and a conversation with Canadians. And going back to that point, you need their trust, you need their support, and if you have their trust and their support, that will drive political consensus at the end of the day. That will drive the consensus. If Canadians all agree with it, if you get polling consistently that 75% of Canadians believe we need more resources devoted to national security and defense, then the politicians will fall into place.
Hey, Chris, does that answer your question? A lot of it's down to political, and I think the Australians actually polled their public before they did their white paper about 20 years ago. And they went out and looked at what they should do with the military, and the answer came back, you need to spend more. So I think oftentimes we're afraid to ask Canadians what they think because we're afraid of what the answer is going to be. And that's not really how democracy should work, as Todd's alluded to. I'm going to pass the torch to Cassandra McDonald now. How's your question? Cassandra?
Yes, thank you. The question that I have is regarding the implications of Canada hesitating or failing to produce a clear national security strategy on the world stage. I study international relations at Harvard University, and they seem to have a very clear strategy about what actions they're willing to take. And I worry as a young Canadian that we are not ready to take action and that we haven't made the necessary preparations in a time where tension between the US and China seems to be rising rapidly.
Sure. I think this is really at the heart of the conversation we've been having, that we have been slow to pony up to the bar. The world has been experiencing seismic shifts for at least 10 or 15 years. And every other country seems to have woken up and said, oh boy, bad things are happening out there. We need to pay more attention to defense. We need to pay more attention to broader national security. And we've been very, very slow in that sense. And so it's time. It is time. And I think we all agree here on this panel that what is going to help drive it to a considerable extent is having a national security strategy. I think having a national security strategy shows that you're serious about this stuff. Like, again, I've discussed all the audiences in my opening remarks. It shows to Canadians, it shows to allies, it shows to our enemies. We are serious about this stuff, and we're going to do these on a regular basis as well. So yeah, I'm a little bit. I have been concerned over the last number of years, and I was in government for 30 years, including as a senior official for many of those years. This is a perpetual problem in Canada. It's not particularly new. It's particularly acute right now, given the state of the world. But I remember back in the 1990s and the early 2000s having these same kind of discussions about we're nowhere close to 2%. We've got the CAF, and Todd will remember this better than anybody. The CAF's being deployed all over Hell's Half Acre in the 1990s and then into Afghanistan while budgets were being slashed. And so the operational tempo of the CAF is going that way and the budgets are going this way. So we've got to get out of that. We've got to get out of that death spiral. And I think we're taking steps, but we've got to continue to do it and show that we are a serious country operating in a very serious world.
And what I would add to that is, first, thanks for the question. It's really a solid question. If we were to continue the same as we've always done and not have a national security policy and then a national security strategy, all we're doing is prolonging the risk exposure. The risk that we're exposed to is a loss of credibility and relevance with our international partners in particular, but also with Canadians as they watch the department and the government dither over what we are supposed to be doing in any given situation. We've been remarkably consistent since 1950 in taking our time to decide what to do. Korea gets invaded, and it takes a hell of a long time for Canada to agree that, we need to send ships at the very least. And Korea is a peninsula, so ships might come in handy, and they did. Well, we need to send a squadron of transport aircraft to help the Americans ferry supplies. And then we need to contribute to what ultimately becomes a Commonwealth division. But that took a lot of time. Once that decision was made, Canada tripled its defense budget in a year and a half. We can do those kinds of things. But if they'd had a strategy that outlined the way they were going to go in a given situation, perhaps we could have sped things up preserved some of our credibility, preserved some of our perceptions of relevance, and actually gotten or preserved the ability to get after what Canadians think is important. Jim Cox raised a point about contribution warfare. And, the very first thing a strategy could do is say, hey, are we satisfied with just contributing to our partners and our allies in this situation? Or are there parts of the world where we actually want to lead? And that's a fundamental question. But in the absence of strategy, we're just going to keep contributing in some way or shape or form that might not be what Canadians want, that might not be sustainable, that might not be useful to our nation.
And I just want to clarify from my perspective. I'm not saying a national security strategy is the be all and the end all. And if we produce one of these strategies, we can all go home and everything's going to be tickety boo. I'm not saying that at all. My point earlier, it's got to be implementable at the end of the day. What I am saying though is that if we're going to get serious about this, it starts at the strategic level, setting the direction for what you're going to do. That's the first step. But then there are lots of other steps after that. And we've talked about some of the components in terms of defense, in terms of diplomacy and all those kinds of things. But a lot of what the government is trying to do right now in response to what Trump has been doing and what the United States has been doing, that's all going to be to the good as well. These nation building initiatives, the building up of resilience, the diversification of our economic interests, the diversification of our trade, all of these come together in terms of a national policy, not just a national security policy, but a national policy to give this country more strategic autonomy. Because I think that's what it's also about. It's about contributing to our allies, but it's also about having strategic autonomy. And I agree completely with Todd. There are places where we probably can lead. We just got to figure out where they are. A lot of people will criticize that we've never had a truly independent strategy or policy in this country. We're followers, not leaders, but we have led in some cases. We just got to figure out where that is.
So where can we put our oar in that makes the most difference?
Well, and a lot of people would say start with the Arctic. Lead in the Arctic, domestically and internationally. Lead in the Arctic.
Okay. I see Cam Ross has got a hand up, so I'll come over to you, Cam, in a minute. And Chris Ankerson, can you talk about foreign policy principles? I see your comment in there about the foreign policy principles articulated in 1947, and the idea of muddling through. Now, I'm not an opponent to muddling through. Sometimes in a complex environment, muddling through is the best you can do. But Chris, can you speak to that a little bit? Or are
Sure,
you
I can speak to that, Quentin. Thanks very much for the floor. Thanks very much for the presentation. I guess the point that I would make is that, broadly speaking, this is not a new lack of a strategy. This has been pretty consistent since at least the articulation of Saint Laurent in 1947. That we have broad principles that, for example, our foreign and defense policies and activities should not undermine national unity, etc. And how we've done that is to react on a case-by-case basis. Yes, we went to Korea, but we avoided going to Vietnam, and largely because we didn't have a grand strategy that talked us into a corner in that particular way. And we see this over and over again. Prime Minister Chrétien was not bound by a defense and foreign policy strategy that talked him into Iraq. He was able to go to Afghanistan, made a rationale to do that from a foreign and defense policy and a development policy, but was unencumbered about going to the assistance of Americans in Iraq. So there is a certain amount of muddling through that has got us where we are. I think the bigger question is, can that continue now? Now, again, everybody would like to have coherence. It's always, the kind of bugbear of small minds. We would like to have consistency. We'd like to have standardization. But I think there has to be some recognition that flexibility as a middle power, as the role we've always played heretofore, as the handmaid to the hegemon, that we've kind of taken advantage of that. Now, the question is, are we going to write something down that is going to hold us to some kind of account or be discarded when that doesn't work? When, for example, we're being rather pragmatic about who we're going to sell our oil to, or whose electric vehicles we're going to be accepting as our own in the next couple of months. I would like to backwards cast and challenge Vincent or anyone else to write the strategy that makes sense of the next kind of decisions that we're going to be making. I don't think that's going to be the case. So all I'm trying to caution is if you paint yourself into a corner with a document, for example, the very nicely written national security strategy of the first Trump administration, written by McMaster et al., was worth absolutely nothing. It was not a playbook. It was not a plan that was followed. It played no sense of reality in guiding what the first Trump administration was going to do. So it was a very nice, coherent document written by one of the biggest minds, or certainly one of the most bigged up minds in the American defense ecosystem, but it really didn't do very much at all. So I would just caution, as Vincent said, having a nice, tidy, coherent strategy isn't necessarily what's required.
So those are great points. It's interesting you raised the Gray Lecture from 1947, because I had a academic colleague say that he thought that the Carney speech to the monk school recently was probably the clearest articulation of our national interests, especially on the international stage, since that lecture, 1947. I don't know if I agree with that or not. One of my comments would be that it's a pretty small sample in terms of major foreign policy or defense policy speeches that have been made by any prime minister in this country for a long time. But that was a pretty clear articulation of, the functional principle and where we can make a difference, what we have to do. Listen, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you say, and you're, I think, reiterating what I just said. A national security strategy is not a cure-all. It's not, oh, we've got one now, everything's fine. I mean, I always, with my students, remind them of the Harold Macmillan maximum: events, dear boy, events. So a strategy sets out broad objectives, the principles, the values, the interests, articulates what you want to do in the world. But there are always going to be events where you have to make decisions. But you hope the strategy is going to help inform those decisions at the end of the day. It'll articulate your values, it'll articulate your interests. So when those crises happen, you can go. I mean, I'm not saying the prime minister is going to whip out the national security strategy and start thumbing through it. Oh my God, I need my playbook. How am I going to make this decision? Oh, it's on page 47, paragraph 2. It doesn't work that way. But it does set out, I think, some guidelines, a roadmap to go, okay, this has happened here. What do we want to do? Is this in our interest? This in our values? I wouldn't say we muddled through with Iraq in 2003, 2004. I think we made the right decision at the end of the day. I also think we made the right decision in terms of going into Afghanistan. Afghanistan was in our national interest, and I think it reflected our values a lot more than Iraq, and a lot more than Vietnam as well, for that matter. It's one of the reasons why we didn't send troops, become formally engaged in Vietnam, although we helped in other ways, lots of other ways. So great points. Canada's still a middle power. We're not if you can still use that terminology, we're not a great power. We're still going to have to make difficult decisions, figure out where we stand in a world that's now run again by great powers. We're making all the big decisions. How do you navigate through all of that? A national security strategy will help, but you're still going to have to make very, very difficult decisions on a case-by-case basis. Whether it's what happens if the UN comes to us and asks us to deploy troops to Gaza? Do we want to get involved in Haiti? I think the answer is no. To what happens if China invades Taiwan? What's Canada going to do if China invades Taiwan and the United States decides to go to war? These are all decision points, but I'm hoping a strategy will be able to say, it's in our interests to do stuff in the Indo-Pacific. We've got an Indo-Pacific strategy which very clearly says that China is aggressive and we have to defend against it. That, I'm sure, would help inform any decisions on Taiwan.
The only thing I would say, Chris, it's really good to hear you again. The second order effect of developing a strategy is you create an ecosystem of people that are thinking about the issues the strategy is meant to address. And right now it's happenstance, and you never know if you're going to get the same people in a room. So the very act of working through and creating a strategy can be beneficial in creating the strategic culture that we need to have, so that the discussions of things that aren't in the strategy, that we didn't anticipate, the black swans, if you will, to overuse that term yet again, you've got the right people informed and able to discuss what to do. But I agree, it's not a panacea.
Okay, as we say, no plan survives contact, right? And I guess you can sort of reduce that to no plan survives, whether it's contact or not. It's 5 after the top of the hour now. Vincent and Todd, are you good to go for another 25 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm,
Yep.
I'm cognizant we have people in other time zones, and I know it's getting late for you.
As long as somebody
And I
can
know
tell,
you're a student now.
are the
So
Blue Jays winning? I need to know that.
I don't know, but I can find out. I will say I will check.
I will check
Um,
it.
Cam, can I pass the torch to you and go ahead with your question?
Thank you, Quentin. Video doesn't work. Um, uh, to both you, Vincent and Todd, excellent points. Vincent, where's Harkey when we need him at these tumultuous times? You've raised very good points, and right off at the start, you talked about connecting with Canadians. Vincent, you'll remember Security Defense Forum, where federal funds went to some 15 Canadian universities to encourage them, like Calgary's Center for Military and Strategic Studies and the like. And that seemed to be a good forum to reach out to Canadians. How do we convince or make more aware the average Joe and Jane that's waiting for the LRT at Chinook, going downtown, that has no idea of what we're talking about? The 53 of our or so of us on this excellent Zoom are all in the same chapel. We are all supporters. We understand the need, but the problem is not us. You said time and time again of connecting with Canadians. So my question really to both of you, excuse me, is should we try and influence to get the SDF or something like it re-engaged? And secondly, do we want to have an involvement as a group to form the policies at the policy conventions of each of the major parties? For example, the Conservative Policy Convention is in the spring. It's a grassroots thing. EDAs provide comments, and there's an excellent opportunity to introduce these types of subjects right to make them part of the fabric of a party's policy, because our challenge is, Vincent, you said very correctly, it's all political at the end of the day, and things change. Todd, you mentioned about the changes of the government and the slashing of planes and whatever else. How do we institutionalize this? And I think it may be in the form of both parties saying, this is important, this is what we need to do. Thank you.
Those are great points, and I miss Harkey Smith. May rest in peace. For those of you who don't know Harkey Smith, he was in the Canadian Armed Forces and National Defense for I think about 60 years, 65. He was my executive assistant when I was Assistant Deputy Minister of Policy, and he was a force of nature. He was something else. Listen, great points. The Security and Defense Forum, I think, was cut during program review in 2010, something like that. Todd, you probably remember. I'd left.
I actually think it was earlier.
Was it earlier? Because
Yeah.
I'd left ADM Paul in 2008, so it must have been just after 2008,
No.
which was very unfortunate. Listen, everything counts, and it's again that culture that just isn't out there. So if you're cutting off Security and Defense Forum, if you don't have a particularly healthy think tank culture in this country, we don't have a lot of think tanks. I mean, I'm on the board of the Conference of Defense Associations Institute, which is doing, I think, a good job in trying to reinvent itself in a lot of ways, but there aren't a lot out there. And same on the foreign policy side, you've got the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, you've got CG, you've got a few other places, but we're not the United States. Now, we're not as big as the United States, but even the UK, Australia, we just don't have the think tanks that are out there that are generating this kind of discussion. But I think every little bit helps. And I think, again, we've got an opportunity here. Unfortunately, it's an unfortunate opportunity because the world is in such bad state that I'm hoping that we maybe can generate a little bit more think tank activity. We can generate the funding to create those think tanks. We can, within government, recreate Security and Defense Forum. We can provide more scholarship money to young people to take masters and PhDs and that sort of thing to get out there and talk about it. But you've got to talk about it. You've got to talk about it, and you've got to engage politically and have that conversation. And I always say this. I think I've already used the line tonight. If we can't do it now, I don't know when we're going to be able to do it. I really honestly don't. But every little bit helps.
Todd?
And all I would really want to say there is, if there was a simple and elegant solution to connecting with Canadians, I think we would have found it by now. It's interesting making the transition from being a general officer in Toronto and engaged with multiple networks there. And I know how often I was speaking in public to different forums. I've got a pretty good idea of how much time each of the service commanders is speaking and trying to connect with Canadians, but it's not working particularly well. And being a university student now in Kingston, where you would think there would be an awareness of the broader Canadian Armed Forces beyond the Royal Military College, it's actually shocking how few even know that the Royal Military College is here. I mean, I'm speaking as a Queen's student. So we have to change the way we're doing it. I don't have a good idea on what we should do differently, but I'll echo Vincent. We need to be speaking and talking and discussing these matters. So going to forums like this, going to the Kingston Consortium on International Security, speaking with public service groups, they all make a difference. And we've all got an obligation to do that if we believe that national security is as much of an issue as it is.
And I think, again, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's an important point. It does have to start at the political level. It means the Prime Minister talking about it, the Prime Minister giving speeches on a regular basis. I co-edited a volume, Canada Among Nations, recently, 21st Century National Security. And one of the articles was by Jean Lang, who's a former Chief of Staff to Bill Graham, who was the defense minister back in the early 2000s. He's now at the Queen's Public Policy School. He wrote this great article on our national security culture, and he looked at speeches from the throne for the last, I can't remember, 10, 15 years, something like that, and the number of times that national security was mentioned in any speech from the throne. The number I think it was 0, 1, 2 times. We just don't talk about this stuff at the highest levels. And again, if you start at the top, and if the politicians talk about it and talk about the threat out there, then that will help drive that discussion down and out. I've said, even when I was National Security Advisor, there's a number of easy things we could do to generate this discussion. We don't do an annual threat assessment in this country, or biannual. We used to do a threat assessment for terrorism, and that got stopped about 7, 8 years ago. But so many other countries, and we've mentioned the Australians a couple of times tonight, although they're having a similar debate about developing a national security strategy right now. But they do an annual threat assessment, I think. The US do threat assessments. Just having a threat assessment produced by the National Security Intelligence Advisor, so it's completely nonpartisan, right? Just let a public servant do the threat assessment. That would generate so much discussion. That would get front page news in the Globe and Mail, new national threat assessment, security threat assessment out, saying all of these things that are happening out there. And that I think would help drive the discussion. NSI COP, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, they do these wonderful, wonderful reports. David McGinty, who's the current minister, used to chair NSI COP, and they have these wonderful reports. The government never responds to them publicly. Never responds to them publicly. These reports are produced, and they go into a black hole. And I'd recommended when I was NSIA that the government should be doing a formal response like they do to regular parliamentary committee reports. I said that we should publish our intel priorities. We finally do. We publish our intel priority, which is a good thing. Generates discussion. Oh, that's where we're focusing our intelligence. That must mean there are threats here. So all those little things at the political level, I think, will really, really help in generating discussion, and then hopefully generating other mechanisms as well, like maybe recreating Security and Defense Forum and other think tanks and things like that.
Okay, excellent. So I see Chris Ankerson has raised the level of the discussion by introducing a dead German. So that's good to know. That's a sign of quality. All we need is a quote from a dead Greek. So with that, We're at 15 minutes to the half-hour mark. There's two hands up, Mike and Andre. So Mike, I'll let you go first. Andre, you can follow Mike, and I think that'll end the questions. And then I'll pass the floor over to Joe to talk about the next presentation. So Mike, please
Hi.
go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Mike.
Excellent.
I just want to say, Vincent, I look up to you. I've read a lot of your stuff and interviews and stuff, and on the CDA, listening to all your podcasts and stuff. My question is kind of twofold. So do you guys have any advice for younger people looking to enter the field of national security? And the second part is, what things do you think are going to change when younger people start entering the field of defense policy and national security? What things in the D&D are going to change? Because I feel like there's a big shift coming, a lot of younger people entering different fields and stuff. There's a really big population of younger people now entering. I'm just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on that, both of you.
Todd, do you want me to go first? Or do you have something?
Sure. Well,
Go ahead.
I can offer an immediate perspective. I was extremely privileged in the last 6 years that I was with the Canadian Armed Forces, that I was educating young people. And these were junior level officers, predominantly from the Army, learning how to plan, and then mid-level majors, lieutenant commanders, in the age range of, the youngest was 32, the oldest was somewhat older than that. And they are the future of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I was consistently impressed with the energy, enthusiasm, the belief that if old folks would get out of the way, they would solve the problems immediately. And so I got out of the way, and now they can go forward and solve the problems. It's absolutely impressive. But I would say going and getting educated, going to school, go get an international relations degree, understand a little bit how the world is thought to work, and then bring it forth and apply it. We've got young people that are doing amazing things across the Canadian government, actually. And I'll echo something Vincent said earlier about the quality of people in the public service. These are not idiots. These are people that come to work every day trying to make Canada a better place. And hats off to them. And it's a hard thing to do. As far as what it would change, I think the culture of the Canadian military is changed by every person that joins it. We all bring something to the equation. And whether it's Q bringing white hair and a certain sense of style back in the day, although he didn't have white hair back then, or a perspective on indigeneity, a perspective on diversity. If I was to harp on one thing, the more diverse our organization becomes, the more human capital we can draw from, the wider range of experiences we can get used to help solve problems. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Mike, thanks for the comments at the outset. That's very, very kind of you. I'm very flattered. Yeah, I would say exactly what Todd just said. I mean, I now work at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill, so I'm in the world of public policy and educating future public servants, future people who are going to be in future careers related to public policy, not just in the public service, but in the private sector think tank. So I'm a great believer in educating the next generation of public servants, and a career in the public service is a rewarding career. It's a noble career. You can make a difference. Yes, it's frustrating at times. Yes, it can turn your hair white. Used to be brown, gray. Now it's white. But it's an incredibly rewarding career. We need young people with new ideas, fresh ideas, innovation, energy to come up and do this stuff. It's really important. I remember when I was doing my PhD a long, long time ago, and I didn't finish it. I ran out of steam, but I remember people telling me again and again and again, there aren't going to be any jobs in academia. Like you're never going to get a job, so just forget it. Defense, security, because I was doing diplomatic, military, defense stuff, and it wasn't sexy. That was the word I heard over and over and over again. It's not sexy. They don't study this stuff in universities anymore, and even in in a public service career, you don't really need to have this kind of an academic background, PhD. I would say again, 30, 40 years later, the world has fundamentally changed. It's a really, really different place. And I would say we do need people now with advanced degrees. We do need people with master's degrees in public policy, in political science, in history, all kinds of different fields. And we need them coming in to be that next generation of decision makers. So, I mean, my number one message to you would be don't think that there's no market for you. There is. I had 2 public policy students this year at McGill working on a policy lab, we call it, and it was on building up Canada's defense industrial base. And they ended up working very, very closely with D&D. D&D was not the sponsor; it was the Wilson Center in the States, which is now no more. But I hooked them up with the people who were working on the defense industrial strategy in D&D, and when it was all over, they got hired. And they're now working at D&D on the defense industrial strategy. There are lots of opportunities out there. One of the great things, as you've seen with Carney and going to 5%, and the 9.3 billion this fiscal year, et cetera, is that they are spending money now and they're looking for people. And I know, talking to very senior people in D&D and in the CAF, they are looking for people. They're looking for young people. They need people. So there are tons and tons of opportunities for you there, and not just in the defense field, in foreign policy, even in development, in CSIS, in CSE, all the intelligence agencies. Lots of opportunities there. So yeah, go forth and prosper, please. You're the next generation.
Great. I would argue that now is a great time to join the CAF because the organization's in crisis. Best time to join an organization is when it's in crisis. So we've got 2 dead Greeks and a dead Roman, so we're doing well. Mike, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. Yeah, just really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Andre, you've got the last question, and then I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thank you very much. Sorry, the camera's not working too well, so I'm gonna have to do this all on audio. First of all, 4-4, bottom of the 6. Thought you'd like to know.
That's better than losing. I'll take a tie for now.
I'm going to say there's sort of a trend now happening within the academic world about national security policy. And the reason I'm saying that, in the past few months, since end of July, I first attended a conference or a speaking lecture by Walton Atenchuk and Sir David Richards. For those who don't know him, he's a former UK CDS, who spoke about interests versus values when you're forming a strategy for a country, which was a quite interesting lecture. And we're coming back to the nuclear sub thing. Our interests would have had nuclear submarines patrolling the Arctic. Our values did not allow nuclear power to be used within the defense for defense areas domain. So there's that. Then talking about McGill, retired General Dennis Thompson came and talked to the McGill continuing learning community a few weeks ago to talk about national security policy. And he started his lecture. It's like, this is going to be easy. There is no national security policy within Canada. He explained what it entitled to and then defaulted, like most of us do, went to national defense policy and explained that, coming back at the end explaining that we need the national security policy. So there's a trend there. And then we have you guys tonight talking about national security policy. I'm a former public affairs officer. What I'm hearing more and more from you guys is we have a communication problem here. I might not have all the details. I might be a bit naive about certain things, but what I'm hearing here is not, I'm not going to say not difficult, because these things tend to be complex. Complex things are easy, easy things are complex, but I could see something there. So my question here, or the comments I'm looking for, tomorrow morning when everybody who listened to the lecture tonight goes, okay, that was interesting last night. What do I do now? Do I write an article in my local paper? Do I go and talk to my member of parliament? Do I put pressure on my member of parliament to say you need to invite Vincent and Todd come talk to the Parliamentary Defense Committee? What do you see as the next step for people listening to you, and where do we go from there? How do you see this?
Well, I would, again, I said, and Todd has said this as well, that a national security strategy is no panacea. And us saying that we need to communicate more, needs to start at the political level. We need to talk about this more. That's no panacea either. Those are just words at the end of the day. And you actually got to go out and do it, and you got to build it. It's going to take time. I'd say, first of all, it is going to take time because you are bumping up against a culture that's been there for, decades and decades and decades, goes deep into our history. So it's not going to happen overnight. But I've also said that everyone's got to do their part, and you start with the smallest of things. So yeah, it is writing an op-ed in your local newspaper, writing an op-ed in the Globe and Mail if you can get it in there, going to these kinds of events and talking, again, as I think one of you said that this is almost like drinking from your own bathwater, because we're all in agreement here. But you got to go out and talk to those people who perhaps aren't in agreement. Talk to your politicians. It's two ways. I've been stressing that the politicians have to show leadership. The government has to show leadership, but you've got to respond to that. Canadians have to respond to it as well. Canadians have to listen and keep an open mind. And while I think Canadians will come around when they hear government say that the world's a dangerous place, we have to do more, but some won't. Some will say, no, I'm more concerned about inflation. Damn it, I don't want to spend 5% of GDP on defense. I'm more concerned about housing. I'm more concerned about healthcare, education. These are the things I want to talk about. Then have that debate. Have that debate around the dinner table. Have that debate at your local community center, wherever the case may be. So it sounds trite and cliched. It's the old who was it? Was it Clinton? Hillary Clinton? It takes a village. It's got to start at the local level, but it's true. It's true. It's got to be a national conversation. It has to be a national conversation. So I can't answer you what's the answer tomorrow morning when you all wake up. And if you do remember this conversation and have moved on to the Blue Jays, you're thinking, boy, what was the message there? I can't say that there's one simple solution to all this, but I think if everybody continues to have this conversation, the fact that you guys are all here tonight means you care, obviously. And try and relay that message to everybody else who's out there, whether it's having a conversation in an Uber or on a train or whatever the case may be. Hey, this stuff's important. This stuff's really important. It's about the safety and security of the country, about people. It's about the very fabric of our nation. It really is about who we are as a country, being able to stand up for ourselves. So this to me is one of the great debates that's facing us right now. We're at a moment of crisis with the United States, with the world writ large. This is a moment for Canada to really step up, but it's going to have to start with this conversation. So that sounds like a Newt Rockne speech, and I'm really sorry for that, but I'm not sure I can do better after an hour and a half.
Todd, last word over to you.
I know I can't do better, so I'm going to quote Robert Ellis, actually. Serve the cause yourself in however you can imagine a way to plug the gaps. I think that's a good way of getting after it, and I'm so glad he put that in the chat. In some ways, this is a bit of an echo chamber, because we are all believers in some way, shape, or form that national security is important, national defense is important, and that Canada as a country is important. But we have to get out of our silo and talk to other people too. So Andre, it's really good to hear your voice again. I'm glad you're at school, and I wish I could see you, but frankly, I'm thankful I can't. So it's good to go there. Thanks for the question, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
Right, and Vincent and Todd, we're going to wrap it up here. And thank you very much, so much, for taking the time to sit down and do this. And I think, I know we talk about awareness. I know we've talked values and culture, and we've talked about an entrenched culture, how difficult it is to change a culture. Cultures are manifested by behavior. So what we need to look at is where people's behaviors are. And we need to start with what we can control. And I think what we can control is the language that we're using around this. So I'm very gratified that we moved from talking about defense policy to talking about national security policy. And Vincent, you hit on the idea that that national security policy is not standalone. It has to be nested within a national policy. So what's the plan? What is our plan? And if every Canadian just asked that question of their national representative and maybe even their provincial representative, hey buds, what's your plan? And then force people to come out and say it. So I think your point about that clash of values versus national interest is well taken. I don't tend to talk about nuclear subs. I tend to talk about an under ice capability. Could be nuclear, could be something else, but we need to get under the ice. And I see that Quinn Beggs, coming in from Scotland, chimed in and talked about the Arctic and the necessity for equipping ourselves properly to get into the Arctic if we really want to do that. So I think we need to decide, to quote another dead Greek, we need to decide where to stand and where we can put our lever. And that lever might move the world. Or if it doesn't move the world, maybe it'll move Canada. So once again, thank you very much for your time. And with that, I will turn it over to Joe for some parish notes about next time.
Thanks very much, Quentin. Before I go, on behalf of everybody, past, present, and future, Vincent and Todd, thank you very much. The presentation this evening went off the scale. Andre, I would refer you to Michael Ignatieff's 1994 O.D. Skelton lecture, where he counsels what was then DFATE on the difference between values and interests. You guys said that education is the center of gravity, and you're right. And I want looking around and seeing who's not here. We're talking to the converted, but I do not see a lot of corporate Canada here. But corporate Canada are also individuals in this debate, and they have skin in the game just as much as we do. So thank you for the incentive. I think I'm going to try and fashion one of these events where our guests will be corporate Canada and see what they have to say. Thank you very much. In terms of think tanks, I'm a big fan of Rand, Brookings, and Stimson. I don't know how much public money they get, but I'm wondering why we cannot begin to replicate that model in Canada at scale. We got little guys like RAUSI, thank you, and that's great, but it's not big enough. Next November 27th, we are going to be inviting states in Europe. Talk about skin in the game. They have real skin in the immediate game. And we want to find out, how do they manage their national security strategy? I'm trying to get Poland. I've got the Netherlands, trying to get Poland, Norway, or Denmark. Failing that, I've got a plan B. But I think we would all like to see, how do those states develop their national security strategy, and are there any lessons we can learn? So on that note, thank you very much for spending the last 1 hour and 34 minutes. And let's call it a night, unless someone else has got something else to say.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed that immensely.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Joe. And
Cheers.
with that, we will wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for attending.